Alrighty. Howdy doody, my inexistent viewers. How are you today? So, for anyone who was actually here yesterday, I apologize for ending the stream rather abruptly. I'm going to try to finalize on a loose kind of stream schedule today. So once I kind of finish up, I'll be sure to upload something then. With that said, as we kind of finished up yesterday, we were kind of just in our little creation workshop here, doing some idea brainstorming, and we were getting into a bit of a good flow before I had to unfortunately end the stream unexpectedly, but yeah, so elves and dwarves and other cool fantasy shit, that's what we're kind of looking at right now today. So we were kind of looking into this elvish kind of forest in the middle of this in the middle of between these two nations, essentially. And we were kind of thinking about like what kind of like environment and power systems and everything else that would kind of exist within this forest. And what I'm thinking is that this forest itself could serve as like maybe probably a very, very large forest, because although we have already determined that the elves are going to be within this kind of domain, we have also established that I want some kind of Celtic druidic community somewhere. And at first the idea was to kind of have them be on their own little island elsewhere, sort of like how Ireland is in real life. But if we have this forest also be stylized as like a bit of a dungeon, we can basically turn this into a bit of a mega forest. And basically it's not only going to have like the elves and everything else, it's also going to have all these druids. Because yeah, nature. Given that it's going to be a very like natural forest and environment with some form of probably like elemental communion with water and like a very strong like quote-unquote font of power area with like some kind of water basis, like with this cascade waterfall village. I'm also kind of thinking like if this elven forest has bordered these two human nations for so long, and that they haven't really had an abysmal relationship with these humans, I imagine some of the humans would actually try to venture in, escape the war, live within the forest in the safety with these elves, and maybe that's kind of how a more human druidic culture has kind of come to be within the forest domain. Now, with that said, if that is going to be the case, I think there would be a certain basis to have some of these elves living together with these humans in tandem, in a bit of a mixed society. But I imagine they will kind of also have their own villages separate from each other as well. So I'm thinking, in addition to like this cascading waterfall kind of scenic environment where all the water elementals are, which can be like the home for like a good solid chunk of these guys, I'm also imagining like some kind of grand tree in the center of the forest. Not the world tree. The world tree is going to be elsewhere, but we will have one. But yeah, let me take down those few notes here quickly. So, forest center is home to large quote-unquote world tree, or mother tree rather, that is revered by the elves and druidic people in a somewhat reverent religious matter. And so this is going to be more of like a a nature kind of deity thing going on. Because we have already worked on a bit of a god of light deity elsewhere. But apart from that, we haven't really fleshed out any other kind of power systems that involve some form of deity, and I imagine nature itself, similar to like a light or goodness, is probably going to be more of an idea of a deity, or a concept of, rather than like a physically formed figure. Although in this case, since the... Oh, moment, sorry. Sorry, I had to sneeze. I'm thinking what we're gonna do is, since it's gonna be like a nature-based deity, maybe they're worshipping the planet and the land itself, rather than just like the tree in this case. So while they will have like a very strong communion with this forest, it's not necessarily like the trees themselves they're kind of worshipping, but more so just like forestry in general. And with elves being elves as well, that makes kind of a lot of sense for them. So Mother Tree is a representation of nature, which is worshipped by the elves and druids. Well, the tree itself doesn't necessarily carry power. It serves as a conduit for the nature god guests slash the quote-unquote Earth Mother itself being revered. This deity holds sway over most slash all of nature, predominantly over flora and fauna. So this is going to tie back in with the original motif for the somewhat druidic power system that we were kind of developing, just in terms of like being able to manipulate or conjure the plants and the environment around you, as well as like communing with the plants and animals, talking to them, commanding them, and basically shaping into them, so to speak. With that said, let's think a little bit more about the power systems in play here. So we know that we want the elemental power system of water, as well as the druidic slash Celtic power system of nature goddess. Cool. So the elemental power system will basically just be the manipulation of all properties of water in its purest form. This doesn't extend to other facets of water such as steam, mist, or ice. Those are reserved for combination elementals. Cool. And then the kind of druidic Celtic system is more so the communion, manipulation, and transfiguration of flora and fauna. Cool. And we were kind of discussing a bit more yesterday in terms of these power systems and how we kind of want them to operate and work. And yeah, no, I've had a bit more thinking since then, and I've come up with what I feel to be a few kind of good ideas and how you want to handle that. So rather than getting like a level per graduation year through the night school or whatever, basically there are going to be different kinds of level systems that basically reflect different achievements. So the level isn't necessarily an indication of your power level, it's an indication of your achievements and merits. Whereas your abilities themselves are going to be separate from level, and that's more so an indication of your power capacity. Same with your stats. For example, going back to our wizard / knight schools, basically we're going to have like the circle levels of magic / the knightly rankings of the kind of Knights Nation culture. So when you kind of graduate the first year of wizard school, you're going to be a first circle mage, up to the third circle mage in your third year. Kind of the fifth circle mages being the teachers, and then I keep saying mages, don't worry about that. And then the ninth circle wizards being like the peak of them. And again, that's not necessarily saying that ninth level wizards is stronger than third level wizards, because technically they obviously are going to be. But the thing is, to become a ninth circle wizard is basically saying you have demonstrated some kind of feats of power involving the system of magic which you utilize, which has been recognized by the people or the wizard council or whatever we're going to be. And same with the knights. So basically it's going to say Knight A gets sent on mission to do job X. Upon completion, they are given a new noble title. So again, you could pretty much try to take these missions on at any time, essentially, and we'll have like a few different like factions or guilds or whatever that kind of progress these things in different ways. And basically you're going to need to like level up your skills and powers kind of elsewhere separately to be able to take these missions on and complete them. But at the same time, doing these missions are also what are going to give you these new stat increases and skill capabilities and whatnot there. So just in terms of how this will work with faith-based systems, it'll probably be like pretty similar. Like the more you devout, the like more power you receive in turn. But I kind of need to think a bit more of the difference within like these quote-unquote class archetypes, because basically with how we're designing the system, classes themselves may not necessarily be a thing. Like you can definitely like get access to these powers, but it's more so rather than getting access to the druid class and then gaining the power of both flora and fauna, it's more so gaining access to power over flora or fauna, and then you're kind of referred to as a kind of specialistic druid within each of those categories separately. So the flora itself will probably be like one tier of power, and the fauna be like a separate tier of power, which will kind of contribute to two different levels. So again, I haven't really thought as much about what kind of cap I want there to be for all these powers. I think roughly right now it's pretty much going to be a loose framework of like 9 tiers of skills or like classifications of skills. But yeah, that seems fine for now. In the meanwhile, what else can we kind of dabble with here? So we'll specify 2 separate villages for both Celtic druids and Elven elementalists / rangers, although they share their homes with each other, along with their resources / teachings, and overall have a positive relationship. Half-elves within these communities will be abundant. Cool. We'll kind of also take down that the original Celtic druids in the forest are stemmed from humans who ran away from the war between the wizards and knights, finding safety in the shelter of the mega forest. Cool. And the forest itself is huge and encompasses much of the border between the wizard and knight nations. From mountain range to sea. In times past, when the wizards and knights went to war, they, let's see, mostly warred around the forest to avoid the hindrance of the terrain. Actually, yeah, in times past when the wizards and knights went to war, they mostly fought around the vicinity of the precious metals to the east, mostly avoiding the forest to avoid provoking the elves, as if the elves sided with one of the factions, the other was likely to lose. Cool. So we can also kind of add on that some measure of diplomatic, political relationship between the two kingdoms and the elves was established in an effort to conscript them to the war efforts. The elves chose to remain neutral. Okay. Now, a couple other things we can kind of work on here. So, what would have been happening at the other end of the border front, on the other end of the forest. So, while the conflict between these two nations is mostly dependent on this resource, given the size and shape of their lands, I'm kind of envisioning the other end of this forest, where the other end of these lands of knights and wizards are, to basically be ocean. So if that was the case, would they have had any kind of conflict there? Or what else is in that area? Those are probably going to be questions we need to answer at some point. But I think for now, we're going to try to leave that be, because the ocean itself being such a massive environment leads to a lot more questions, such as, are there any islands or archipelagos off the shore? If there are there any people there? If they are, have they kind of encountered these two nations? If so, what is their relationship in history? And then there's also the question of like, are there any kind of like underwater races in that area, like the Jra? I haven't really touched base on those much yet, but they're basically going to be like the mermen, or the merfolk, or the mermaids. Okay, let's see. In the meanwhile, I'm just going to bold that for future reference. Okay. So you know the elves and druids in the forest, they have a pretty good kind of culture. There is going to be a mother tree which kind of gets worshipped. And I'm imagining if this mother tree is kind of like in the center of the forest, it'll be a lot further away from the kind of magnetic field, so that won't really interfere with it. So we're probably going to aim to have like 3 sections of forest. Section near magnetic field. Local flora, fauna impacted by the magnetic field. differing terrain compared to rest of forest. Not far from where the magnetic field ends, the river water cascades down. Oh, I'm kind of thinking now, if we have the mother tree basically be in the area, the cascading waterfall, I think that'd be a much prettier environment rather than like separating those two areas. So maybe the mother tree is like closer to that, and yeah, let's do that. Not far from where the magnetic field is, the river water cascades down into a beautiful scenic area where the mother tree of the forest dwells. The Druids and Celtic, the Elves and Celtic Druids have built the majority of their homes and culture around this area. This is the font of water elementals power, as well as the power of flora/fauna of nature with the Druidic people's belief. The nature goddess/mother tree. Now, that said, I'm kind of thinking, now in the forest center, the king/queen of beasts resides, the true protector of the forest lurks deep within. Question: what kind of massive primordial forest-like beast would be in the center of this forest? And I think for this, the best thing we can probably do is going to be to answer, find the answer based on like Celtic mythos. So, what kind of legendary or mythical beasts are present in Celtic mythos and legends? Because like right now the obvious answer is like maybe some kind of like large snake, but a lot of the serpents are already occupied by like the Norse culture, so I don't really want to do too much with that there. So, let's see. First result is a puka, a shape-shifting creature that can take various forms, including a horse, a goat, a cat, dog, or even a human. There's also the banshee. Okay, interesting. Banshees are spiritual undead. Banshees, spiritual undead from Celtic mythos. I never actually knew that banshees were from Celtic. So Selkie, mythical creature that can transform from seals into humans. The Kelpie. Yeah, I know about the Kelpie. The Hound of Ulster, Chughlane's Hound. I'm never going to pronounce any of these correctly. Fearsome Hound associated with him, known for his incredible strength and loyalty. Type of fairy. Yeah, I imagine there might be some form of fae/fairy in the forest, as well as like some kind of connection to the fae world, because fae are going to be a big thing in this as well. You also need to think about a connection to the elemental world. The dual hound, of course, a questing beast, a chimera creature with a head and neck of a serpent, the body of a leopard, the haunches of a lion, and the feet of a deer. Another water horse, some form of giant. Okay, we can have some form of giant. What else do we have? A Bogart? Oh, Bogart's a Celtic. And Katesif. Okay. Let's expand our question. What types of Celtic creatures are synonymous with forests? I'll see if we get a few more hits this way here. So dryads, of course. Again, we aren't necessarily going to use any or all of these, but they are worth taking into account for inspiration. Okay, there are hags. Wilderness. Frederick. Yeah. Okay, I think we got a bit of a good range. Ideally, some type of legendary beast could have been cool, but I think settling for some form of giant who's like in there could just be as fine as well. But what we also kind of want to think of is we don't just need like a boss, we kind of need a boss, minions, special properties / environment, purpose, why this area, some form of treasure / reward. These are the kind of things we kind of need to think of for any kind of quest / dungeon style system. Since I do imagine the wizard and knight areas themselves are probably going to be lower tier in terms of danger level, since they're probably intended to be like the most well-developed, kind of well-fleshed out nations, least amount of danger, less scary kind of dangerous monsters. And I imagine while the Elves Forest itself might have a higher power / danger level, I don't want it to be too obscenely high at this stage, because right now we're thinking the wizards and knights go to their academy, they might do some kind of mountain / dungeon expedition in the caves and mountain nearby, and when they've kind of done that, the next kind of logical order of things from there is either to go to the nearby Elven Forest, further into the heartlands of the Knight or Wizard Kingdoms, and or over the mountains into the desert area. So there's a few kind of ways they could go. Right now I imagine going into the heartlands of the Wizard or Knight Kingdom will more so lead towards the capitals of the respective culture, where rather than seeing a hybrid of the culture like they would in the Wizard and Knight town, and we'll also kind of get to see the pure culture of these nations on their own at their heart. And I imagine there would be a decent amount of distance between the combo town and the capitals, so there could be a few other things on the way. That's probably going to be the safest route they could go from that kind of starting point. And then I imagine like going into the Elves Forest to like see their village would be somewhat of a trek, and then the heart of the forest where the giant is would be like another level or two above that. In comparison, I imagine like going into the desert on the other side of the mountains would probably be like similar to the center of the forest in terms of difficulty, if not a level higher on top as well. So that's a good kind of thought process to keep in mind when developing this world, and why. Like, if there are areas with more people, it's probably safer, and the less reclusive areas are probably a lot more dangerous. Similar to our own world, obviously. let's see. So let's see if we can get an idea for ideas for a forest style dungeon. So, I mean, there are the classic examples like the forest temples and the Zelda series, and like giant spiders and everything else. But I don't think we want this to necessarily be a kind of developed forest. Question: how much civilization developed within the forest throughout history? Answer: none. This forest is pure, untapped, and unclaimed, both in tandem thanks to the elves and Celtic druids' efforts, but also the giant forest protector. So while I do love the idea of like old ruins down in the middle of a forest or a jungle or whatever, we're probably going to save those for elsewhere a bit later on. Okay, so some ideas could be some kind of what kind of environments could be found in this section of forest. So we have enchanted glades, mushroom caverns, murky swamps, and I do like the idea of like having some kind of mini kind of tests in the elven village, like a tree test, climb inside through the other tree's trunk and get to the top. Okay. Let me see. We also need to think a little bit about these other environments, because it might not just necessarily be a whole forest throughout, because I'm thinking one of the things that could be in the center is a little goblin swamp village on the other end of the forest, closest to the ocean. And now we can think about the goblin village as well. So it is for a swamp style dungeon. So this will probably be like separate from the central area, which will be the most dangerous. So east-west sides of forest by mountains slash seas are quote-unquote safest. These are the areas with the elves, druidics, celts, and then goblins respectively. So what about the north slash south sides of the forest, as well as the center of the forest? Because again, I want this forest to be absolutely kind of massive. So I'm thinking yeah, so we can have the one part Druidic town, one part Elven town, one part Celtic town. Do we want to keep the Elves and Druids combined? Because basically how I'm kind of imagining it would have played out is humans escaping the war by entering from both sides of the forest. So we'll say humans who entered from wizard border side of forest became druids, humans who entered from night side of forest became bandits. So maybe we've got some kind of like bandit camp in there. Cool. Alrighty. Because I'm imagining if the elves and the druids have been around in there for so long, theoretically they could have more than one kind of village. Because I'm imagining there might be a more peaceful sect of elves and whatnot. So living in harmony with the elements slash poetry, along with the druids, and then maybe some forward outposts of aggressive elven rangers, fending off the bandits from hurting the L slash forest. Cool. That still kind of leaves the druidic side. Maybe we can have the side where the Celtic druids enter from wizards side is uninhabitable. Habitable due to terrain. Hence why they moved further east and shacked up with the elves. Cool. No, I think that's pretty good. So maybe there's some kind of like cliff works or something on this side of the forest by the wizard's border, which kind of separates them from the center of the jungle, the forest rather. And I'd say maybe the cliffs itself are like pretty close in. There's maybe not, and it kind of, there's not a lot of water in the area because the kind of rivers will be further north, slash they might end up passing through the domain where the cliffs are. And imagine in this case the cliffs kind of lead downwards and inwards, and there probably really wasn't like a safe way down from there. Cool. And they probably specifically would have gone in the direction of the elves because they would have known like the rivers and the water come from the mountains to the east, kind of come that way. So they would have had a rough idea of which kind of direction to go through. Now, do we want some kind of like goblin swampy dungeon? Because in this worldview, goblins aren't necessarily going to be evil. They're more so chaotic. If anything, I imagine some of the goblins could be enslaved by like the nearby human bandits. So some of the things are marshes, mires, bogs, ooh, fungal groves, some dungeons with some kind of witches slash hags, trolls, mushrooms, ghosts, etc. Because as we've established before, there are going to be different underworlds, and so far within the domain of these regions we haven't really established any kind of underworld customs for any of these people. I imagine the elves themselves may believe in some kind of like elemental or fey communion, in which they may end up back within the domain of the elemental or fey realms or something. They've got some kind of connection there. But maybe the kind of goblin side is a bit more witchcraft, voodoo-y, haggy or something. So we need to establish what they might be capable of at some stage. Now, with that said, I'm imagining maybe the central part of the forest is perpetually covered in mist and fog. This is the domain of the trickster Fae, who mislead travelers and get them lost within. In the center of this area, there is some connection to the Fey world, where creatures can come and go between realms. So maybe the Fae like try to trick people to go into the Fey world or something, and that's gonna be a whole other beast that we're gonna have to tackle on eventually. One of the other things to think of is whether or not the Fey world will be the same as the elemental worlds, whether they're going to be separate, what the kind of communion or connection is between these different types of like fairies or spirits and elementals. Because I would argue, like, rather than having some kind of giant in the center of the forest, having a fucking connection to the Fey world is probably a hell of a lot more dangerous. And I do kind of like that, because while I don't mind the idea of having a giant in the center of this forest, the rough plan is for this to be like a mega forest. So a single kind of giant in the middle wouldn't really be enough of a threat. And while giants are going to be like pretty notable in this kind of worldview and play some significant roles, I'd say they're kind of like the descendants of Titans. So Titans are probably like the continental-sized landmass like figures who literally cause tsunamis with every step they take. They're on the natural disaster scale, similar to how dragons are going to be in this worldview. And giants themselves are probably like a lot smaller in comparison. So they're definitely still big enough to like stand up within the center of the lake, but they're less like world-ending size, if that makes sense. Alrighty. So I think we'll get rid of the giant idea. And I do like the idea of having some kind of beast somewhere within this forest as well. But maybe rather than in like the center of the forest where the phase stuff is, maybe the beast is closer to like the elf slash human kind of bandits side or the goblin side, and it kind of maybe protects the border within that range from like the phase separation. Let's even look at what kind of beasts are associated with the Fae. We'll see if we get some different hits for this. Okay, so Pegasus, Unicorn, Pixie Dragon, It's kind of unsurprising. All the kind of goody-goody fairy kind of ones you get in mind. It's like will-o-wisps. Let's see. Spriggans, fairy-like creatures that can grow to enormous sizes. What do spriggans look like? They seem to be fairy-like. Let me see if I can get an idea of visualization. It's basically coming up with an anime. It seems to be some kind of like tree person though. Like a tree fairy. It's probably not really what we're going for here, but it's good to kind of keep that in mind. Now, we've kind of expanded pretty well on this section. Just thinking of anything else that might be within this forest's confines. Because again, none of this is finalized as always at this stage. We're just theory crafting the building blocks so we kind of know what to do with everything else. So I don't think any kobolds or ogres or orcs would be within the forest. But let me create a little board here for Elven Forest. We're pretty much gonna put all that in there for now. I'm just gonna leave that be. So now I kind of want to do the same thing as what we just did, but maybe with some kind of dwarven stuff instead. So I'm also thinking away from the forest now and more about the giant dwarven environment. So, so these are going to be stone dwarves under the mountain range that protects the eastern borders of the knights / wizards. So at this stage I'm imagining tunnels that connect under throughout the mountains. Some of which go under the Wizard Knight Nation, as well as the deserts further east. Cool. So, to that end, I'm kind of thinking right now, so large dwarven city, not much volcanic activity / lava / magma. Eastward tunnels, manually carved, lead to a series of expansive tunnels carved through sandstone under the deserts, which were bored by sandworms. On occasion, sandworms' encroachment result in dwarves having to defend their territory from them. So the worms won't tunnel through and dig / eat through all of the dwarven city buildings, architecture, etc. Okay. Now, question would be, are the Sand Assassins aware of the Dwarven Kingdom and sandworm passages beneath the desert? If so, what is desert people relation with stone dwarves? Cool. So that's not something we need to answer now. I can kind of wait till we focus more on the expansion of that area, similar as to how we aren't really expanding too much on the kind of goblin-y area or the kind of ocean area by the kingdom's other borders at this stage. So what I'm thinking is roughly at this stage, what else are the dwarf kind of tunnels going to connect to? So I imagine there are dwarven tunnels up throughout the mountains, which lead to the surface at various points. Some of the caves are occupied by monsters such as trolls, ogres, wyverns, griffins, which the dwarves may contentions against. Tunnels also lead to the underground area where the magnetic minerals are. And they likewise course up through to the nearby human school / village. Okay. So, I'm imagining now stone dwarves utilize harvesting manufacturing techniques for magnetic minerals. What do they do with them? I imagine that has some kind of use or purpose for them, because again, keep in mind, we are going to have a few different like stone kind of dwarvy cultures around the world, and I'm not sure if I've expanded on this yet, but I want these dwarves to literally be made of stone. So they aren't made of flesh and bone, they are literally carved from the earth themselves, and that's how they produce more of their people. So, I'm kind of thinking, how do we want to walk with them? As mentioned before, I don't really want any kind of lava or magma in this area in particular. I want to save that for somewhere else, later else, and that kind of leads to a new kind of series of dwarves there. I'm imagining these dwarves probably utilize metals a lot less. These ones are probably more about the stone and the earth itself, like sculpting their the kind of earth through stone as well. So I don't know if they necessarily have like a lot of metallic minerals or tools or even weapons, which might go against a lot of the archetypes out there, but hey, we gotta have some variety. We can't just copy paste the same fucking dwarves everywhere, just like how we're not copy pasting the same fucking humans everywhere. With that said, dwarves are stone crafters / stone shapers, have communed positive relationships with natural local Earth elementals are dwarves considered Earth elementals themselves? Now, what else do we want? We are probably going to want to think about more about the relationship between these dwarves and the nearby human villages, but also about what kind of environment down here would lead to the manifestation of Earth elementals, like some kind of font of power. What kind of special / unique underground environments are there? So bear with me a moment as we look this up. What kind of special, unique underground environments are there? So I know there's all going to be like all the geodes and maybe some underground rivers and then like volcanic areas and like mineral field areas as well. That we want to be as kind of vanilla as possible with this area and basically have something unique just from like the earth and stone itself. So crystal caverns, lava tubes, ice caves, underground rivers and lakes, fungus forest. Let's see. Seismic fault zones. Let's learn a bit more about what are seismic fault zones. So, area of high seismic activity, reason for the mountain range above, also creates vast chasms, pits of pitch black nothingness within the underground areas. So I think that could be interesting. I'm just gonna see if we can learn a little bit more about these seismic fault zones in the meantime. Because I kind of need to know, like, what they might look like. So I'm even going to look up an image. Underground seismic fault zone. Cool. Let's see. It's mostly just okay, interesting. Some of the images are less so mountains and more so like rifts within the earth itself, which is pretty cool. Like, I wouldn't mind some kind of like big rift or tear somewhere in the world, but this probably isn't going to be the place for it. I think for now, just having the idea of like the mountain range above with some kind of like deep caverns below is pretty cool. But let's see, what other info do we have? So, Seismic fault zones are areas where tectonic plates meet and interact, causing the Earth's crust to fracture and create faults. These zones are characterized by significant geological instability and are often the sites of earthquakes. Seismic fault zones are primarily found at the boundaries between tectonic plates. The three main types of plate boundaries are divergent, convergent, and transform. Okay. So normal faults occur at divergent boundaries where the crust is being pulled apart. Then we also have like ones that occur at convergent boundaries where the crust is being pushed together. And then ones that transform boundaries where plates slide horizontally past each other. Cool. Sandworms. Yes, we are going to have some sandworms in some of these areas. So I'm kind of thinking a little bit how we could potentially introduce these sandworms into having some kind of relevance to these seismic faults underneath this dwarf city I'm kind of working on. So, sandworms causing the seismic faults. Can the sandworms burrow their way through the vast chasms and pits created by the faults? What else do we have? So, what kind of impacts would earthquakes have on this dwarven city? And even more so, how frequent are they? And what kind of effects would they have on the human civilization above? Along with, what kind of influence does this have on the magnetic field, slash what kind of influence does the magnetic field have on these quakes? Golems. So, that's an interesting point you bring up, because basically the dwarves I'm kind of having in this worldview, or at least the ones in this area, are going to be made of stone themselves. So they're kind of going to be a bit golem-like in their own way. So I'm imagining like some kind of forefather or allfather dwarven progenitor basically created this species by shaping man from stone. And that's kind of how the first dwarves came into be. They've kind of continued that practice to create more of them. So while they are technically sentient in and of themselves, I don't necessarily know if they would be considered golems, but I'm having a less sentient kind of golem thing elsewhere. Golems and dwarves both like ore, right? Yes. So the environment itself will have like some special kind of like magnetic property ore, which is a pretty major focal point for a lot of the history of this area. I haven't really thought as much about how the dwarves might use this, but you just give me a bit of an idea of how we can, based on these seismic faults. So, dwarves utilize the magnetic material of the nearby minerals to help reinforce their structures / protect against sandworms and magnetic faults by utilizing the minerals in such a way they are attracted to the incredibly strong magnetic field above to help prevent them falling into chasms / breaking apart from seismic activity. Cool. But yeah, so basically, this kind of area with this worldview is within the domain of this really like powerful magnetic field, and that's basically the kind of catalyst for a lot of human innovation on the surface of this area, which has kind of developed a magnetic-based magic system. And that field's also created these special magnetic minerals, which both like attract and repel very strongly towards like magnetic influences, such as this magnetic field, as well as other ones having like no magnetic interference at all. So I'm thinking if the Dawns get their hands on these some of these minerals, they can basically create their buildings in such a way to help them being pulled apart by this seismic activity. Okay. Cool. So, I also need to think of some kind of underground dungeon near the settlement, because I already have a bit of an idea of the kind of magnetic ore caves themselves being a pseudo dungeon area, which the Dwarves and humans kind of share to harvest these minerals. But what kind of threats would be in there? So we can think about the potential invasion of sandworms, creatures that eat metal / ore / mineral, large pits and chasms, earth elementals, things like that. Alright, so I've got a bit of an idea of what's kind of going to be to the east, west, below, and above this dwarven settlement. But I also need to think about the north and south. So, dwarven city below the mountain range. Human civilization above, deserts / sandworm tunnels to east, human civilization is going to be more west in this case actually. West, and then north and south. So, what kind of underground monsters / creatures are found within fantasy? So, an easy way to kind of cop this out would just be to say, oh, there's just like some very strong earth walls to the north and south that the Dwarves haven't really kind of gotten past. But I kind of like the idea of more things being there. So Dwarves, could have another kind of goblin tribe, or some kind of kobold or troll tribe. I don't want to go into the realm of dragons or giants here just yet. We could do some mycenoids / fungal caverns / fungus culture, especially more towards the west, because I can kind of connect well with the under region beneath the troll forest and all the water kind of in those areas. Let's see. Yeah, no, I kind of like that idea. above, so let's think westward is more so going to be fungal caverns beneath the forest. Cool. So since this is technically closer to a beginner area in theory, kind of also need to think about level scaling, potentially. So fungal caverns beneath the forest feel pretty reasonable. Sandworms being a bigger threat to the east sounds about right. So, kobolds and trolls. We could basically have one kind of be in each kind of area. So I imagine ogres up the mountain more so. I kind of need to think a bit more about how these environments might connect elsewhere. Because right now, basically I haven't fully I think I've roughly determined that the wizard civilization and the knight civilizations above, the wizard one's going to be more northward and the knights are going to be more southern. And I do roughly want the wizards kind of border some kind of alchemist nation on the other side, basically to share some form of magical innovation. And alchemists love troll blood, so I'm thinking underground kind of troll community, and maybe the south with the knights can be a kobold community. And we can maybe expand on them a little bit more. Because I do want the trolls themselves to basically live in a bunch of like random, haphazard, dangerous kinds of environments that people don't really go to. So that seems fitting for them. And the kobolds may be living on like caves higher up that lead more to the surface. Also feels kind of good there. That might be alright for now, because we're not like fleshing all the details out for everything quite just yet. More so just getting an idea of where everything's loosely going to be. So let's grab these and whack them in here. Cool. Alright, so for the most part, let's think a bit more about this kind of central continent we've been working on. So we have, let's do it this way. So we're gonna have the mountain range kind of here, some ogre slash human fortress within the peaks of the mountain range. To the east are going to be the desert with the sand people and this sandworm slash sandworm caverns below. And here we kind of have the Dwarven settlement. Or rather, I should put it more like this. Cool. Alright. So human wizard knight settlement, then we'll have the kind of elven forest plus the fungal caverns. Troll Society. Okay. Yeah, it's thinking about this, since I have to do north, east, southwest, and then like the different orientations within like above ground, ground level, and underground. I don't know if I'm going to be able to shape what I kind of had in mind to do there as well as I wanted. Dwarves, yeah, basically. Okay. Now I'm kind of just thinking where we might kind of want to work on next. Because we have made a good kind of bit of progress thinking more about this central kind of continental region and everything kind of within it. But a lot of this is still a bit untapped. Let's take a look at these Persian-inspired assassins. So this is going to be the Desert Empire. So, on the opposing side of the mountain range, bordering the Wizard/Night Kingdoms, an expansive desert resides. Within these lands, water is a rare and precious commodity that decides life and death. The days have an intense heat, the nights have an intense cold. Sandworms abound through the desert, carving and boring tunnels beneath and throughout the soft sandstone below. The rare oases spread around the desert are occupied by small nomadic tribes of human civilization. A large troll empire also exists within the sands. Cool, and that's kind of tying a bit more into how I want the trolls in particular to play a bit of a massive part in just like having these large cultures where humans otherwise struggle to live. That said, what else can we think about in terms of this desert empire? So I have touched base before on having like these fonts of power for these elemental spirits, like having places of water, like water spirits, and places of earth have earth spirits, and the kind of theory and concept with those was to get these separate spirits and basically combine the powers of like earth and wind to influence sand, rather than having sand elementals. But I do still like the idea of having some kind of font of power for like desert locations and like glacier locations as well. So maybe we do kind of give the possibility to have these kind of combined elementals outside of just like combining their powers individually as well. So sure, you can get both a wind and water elemental and then make ice, for instance, but you can also just go to this glacier and maybe contract with an ice elemental there, and then you can kind of keep doing the same thing wherever anyway. So, font of power for desert sand elementals. Now, it's difficult to talk about a desert and sandworms without referencing fucking Dune somehow. What kind of relationship do we want these kind of assassin culture to have with these sandworms? Let's ask the question. What type of relationship do the human/troll cultures have with sandworms? Because I'm kind of liking, rather than the humans having dominion over them, I like the idea of the trolls having dominion over them. And that way we can kind of make the trolls a much more monstrous and overpowering and dominant feeling race in comparison to these kind of assassin human cultures, who I kind of want to more so rely on poisons. And maybe the reason why they've come to rely on these poisons is precisely because of the trolls and their infamous regeneration. Human society, in order to develop within the desert, had to rely on the gathering, production, and utilization of poisonous materials to fight back against the trolls, a method that allows them to contest troll regeneration. And maybe that's kind of come a bit into play with the sandworms they wrote as well, using different kinds of poisons for those, maybe. Or maybe like some of the poison is like more of an acid, and that comes from the sandworms themselves. What else can we kind of do? So I do want there to be like two separate desert cultures, and they probably will share a border with each other. Just thinking of mushroom people too. Yeah. We got the mushroom people in the elven caverns beneath the elven forest. So that's a good idea of where those are. Let's see. Human society in order to develop within the desert. Yeah, so two separate human desert cultures. So we are going to have let me see, the Persian assassins and Babylonian merchants, essentially. So what we're going to do with that is the Persians, or the assassins rather, are a more diverse nomadic people spread all throughout the sands, fighting tooth and nail on a daily basis to survive. Babylonian merchants occupy a desert gulf, and I'm kind of thinking sort of like how Qatar is a bit on a peninsula. On a peninsula surrounded by ocean water. This allows them to expertise in the development of naval trade with other powers and import much of the resources needed. I imagine within the sands, sandworm boring leads to underground water sources which are utilized by the people to live. I'm also kind of imagining the assassins take advantage of the sandworm tunnels to avoid the harsh sunlight during the day and get ready access to the water below. That said, the underground tunneling by the worms is too chaotic and constant to rely on developing any kind of architecture slash infrastructure below. So the assassins are generally on the run in the tunnels while they are down there. Cool. Alright, what else? So I like to imagine the desert expanse above is mostly the domain of the trolls who dominate the area, often hunting human travelers as a form of sport for fun. The trolls and cells have occupied the largest oasis within the desert's center. Have occupied the largest oasis within the desert center and have constructed a veritable civilization there. Maybe there is some small patches of greenery at the base of the mountains on the westward desert side. And I'm thinking where small sources of water are available, thanks to some downpouring of occasional small rivers from the mountains above. So water will definitely be like less available on this side of the mountain. That isn't to say that there's going to be none at all. So small packets of assassin civilization mostly thrive here. So I'm going to say, yeah, they're probably very few in number. Assassins, very few in number, but each individual member well trained, adapted to survive in harsh environments. Mountains themselves are very steep, large, and jagged, and are nearly impossible to ascend and cross over from this side. Cool. What else can we kind of do there? I'm thinking of why, apart from this like mountain range to the west, would these guys be trapped within this desert? So the question is, what kinds of why do the assassins remain here? What stops them from leaving? Apart from the Westwood Mountains. So, I imagine assassins and merchants don't have a positive relationship, despite being aware of each other's existence. Many of the desert assassins are exiles from the merchant city, forced to live in the desert as punishment for city crimes. So that kind of explains some things there. The merchants are aware that the desert goers are hunted by trolls. But turn a blind eye because this keeps the trolls' attention turned away from them. I imagine exiles are identified by a brand on their face. And I'm kind of just thinking a bit more about how this this landmass is going to shape, because I know I kind of want the mountain range to the west with the kind of knights and wizards, maybe alchemist kingdoms on the westward side of the mountain, with the southern borders kind of leading around to this expansive military empire. So we'll say the southern border connects with the empire. It's an empire who guard their borders strictly and tersely. Well, they want to dominate the continent. They have no desire to rule over the expansive desert, nor do they wish to allow foreigners' passage into their lands. So, why would the militant empire who wants to conquer all and convert all to their faith not want to have relations with these assassins? And I'm gonna say these assassins have a culture, customs, and religious beliefs of their own. Their belief in their Lord is what gives them strength to survive within the harshness of their environment. Their faith allows them to live on. Converting from or abandoning their faith is no different to giving up one's life, so they prefer to survive within the desert, irrespective of the Empire's borders below. And listen, Empire does not want to accept those of other faith unless they come to embrace their own. Cool. Now explaining to the Seven Border, and I think the kind of Babylonian merchants will probably be to like the southeast from there. So Babylonian merchants to southeast do not share a land border with Militant Empire, which has kept them separated from them and safe for now. Two nations maintain a neutral relationship based on the expanse of wealth and trade. Cool, that sounds good to me. So since we're going to have these Babylonians on this little peninsula, that's going to keep them nice and away from this Militant Empire for now. And since south of the Militant Empire is the quote-unquote Greek archipelago, I butchered that. It's the Greek archipelago, which they are in constant naval battle with, so they do not have capacity to wage war on a scale that extends to the Babylonians as well. So the Babylonians conduct sea, land trade with desert exiles and Troll Empire, while conducting sea trades with the rest of the human civilizations. Cool. So we're gonna have West is going to be like, let's try this again from a national perspective, because this will be easier to kind of placing. So alchemists, below which are the wizards and the knights, along with the theocracy, Militant Empire, Desert Empire, Greek islands, and basically Babylon. Cool, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I think there's still one nation I had in mind for this area, and that is going to be the Celtic Druids. I think that's I think that ends up being pretty much all of the nations I kind of wanted placed down, which is nice. So that would mean I can move these kind of this way a bit, and we'll say this is the mountain range, which kind of like separates them from everything else. like that. It'd be convenient if I could like turn this, but I don't think I can. So Desert Empire is basically going to be like touching the ocean front out there. Then we'll also have like ocean out here, as well as like ocean out here. Cool, so that's a pretty good idea of how these borders are going to work. Probably looks a bit messy looking at it like that, but this is actually giving me a pretty good idea in my head of what I kind of want. Because again, I don't really want anything like volcanic or arctic or tropical within this central continent. They are going to have like winters and summers and like snow and ice and like heat and fires and everything in between, but they aren't going to have like full-on climates outside of these ones. So I think that is a pretty good setup there. Now, what I'm thinking is just like if there's going to be any other kinds of like cultures or peoples within these environments outside of the elves, dwarves, goblins, ogres, and trolls, which we've kind of already established. And I definitely want some kind of orc presence somewhere on here. So we're going to want to expand on orcs. We need to expand on the ogres a bit, as well as some kind of fey presence. I'm just gonna tab out to my background resources and check out some of the other ones we've kind of got. So what kind of demon / angel presence and devil presence are we going to have? And outside of those, the other races may include, do we want any kind of giant presence, titan presence, dragon presence, or Shra, Wildkin, Avia? And outside of that, that's actually also the lizard folk. So I've mentioned before, I kind of want a little bit of everything in terms of this central continent. And right now, we've kind of got a pretty good expanse on quite a number of things, especially with all the human cultures I definitely wanted to indoctrinate. Right now, mostly everything is on the western side, which kind of makes sense based on the rough, loose geography we've kind of constructed so far. But there are a few other things we can kind of work with here too. So, let's look at this. So we know that the dwarves under mountain range, trolls in desert empire, elves in wizard / night forest. We want some kind of fey in the center of forest. Now, I'm thinking of kind of revisiting the trolls a little bit. Mushroom folk beneath forest. So, when I say revisit the trolls, I don't necessarily mean the Troll Desert Empire, which we kind of looked at earlier. I'm also referencing how initially we had a little bit of a thought process that maybe there are some trolls in the northern kind of mountain range side by the kind of alchemist region, but I don't think we're gonna do that, just because I do want the trolls to be the more expansive dominant power in like the central continent. Now, Celtic within Elves Forest, Wizard, Knight, Border. So, ogres dominate mountain range. That is a thing I really want to work on a lot more. They in forest center, so we're gonna kind of put on the right hand side what we need to work on more. We briefly did mention some kind of goblin swamp, maybe being more towards the ocean kind of border side of these Wizard and Knight nations, but I'm thinking maybe, since there's a lot there, I like to imagine the swamp having a lot of interesting and unique things which alchemists could take advantage of, so I'm thinking now maybe a goblin swamp in Alchemist Nation borders. Since there is like a lot between the Wizards and Knights right now, it's kind of going to be good to spread them out a little bit more, I think. Now I do like the idea of the kobolds being between the Knight/Militant Empire border within caves and tunnels, because the southern reach of the mountain range is kind of going to be the end of the border between those kind of two nations as well. So that's kind of good to think about. So these ones here I need to think less about, because they aren't necessarily going to have their own domain within this area. The others, however, the orcs in particular, I really want to have some kind of culture for. Sorry about that, my headset briefly cut out. So yeah, the orcs in particular I really want to be somewhere. Most likely some form of rugged environment similar to the ogres, but I don't kind of want them to be in the same mountain range. So since we have the trolls in the desert and the ogres in the mountains, I'd love the idea of having them in some kind of badlands, but I don't necessarily know if I want any kind of badlands to be here. And I definitely don't want them in any kind of like abundant environment like a forest. So there could be some kind of border canyons or something, or valleys around the desert somewhere that we can kind of put them. So I'll think a little bit more about that. Because again, I don't necessarily know. I think the question more so is, do I want anything on the northern or eastern side of the Troll Desert? Because right now, how this is working is all of the kind of well-developed areas are to the south and west, and the north and east is pretty much just like all desert. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's more a question of like how big I want this desert area to be, essentially, because I do want to have a lot more kind of desert cultures elsewhere. And there is a certain tempting appeal for like deserts in particular to just be like large, expansive domains of nothingness, essentially. So I think having the desert be like the ultimate mysterious place on this continent, and potentially be like the most dangerous one as well, with all these trolls and sandworms, could be fitting, because maybe that's somewhere within that kind of desert, maybe where we have some kind of lost bastion from the dragon and kind of Titan's heydays or something. Now, I am also thinking that maybe these kinds of assassins / Babylonians have contracts with the Celestials and Demons. So, Babylonians contract Celestials, and the Assassin Exiles are Demon contractors. So I think we can make something pretty interesting work with that there. Alrighty. Now, apart from that, we have the lizard folk. So, I don't necessarily want everything to be in the central continent, but at least a part of everything. So, the lizard folk generally are seen as kind of being in a bit of a more swampy kind of marshy environment. Maybe swampy marsh in Alchemist domain also has lizard folk. We can create a few more interesting stories up that with them through that. And maybe we have some kind of insectoid people somewhere as well. So, ant people, I do like the idea of some kind of like humanoid ant race somewhere here. The first thought that came to mind was kind of like the tunnels under the Desert Empire, but instead I'm thinking maybe this could more so be a threat for some of the other kind of kingdoms, because the Babylonian place is basically going to be like a city-state. It's going to be pretty tiny, so I'm thinking one of these three we kind of need to expand a bit more on like other racial stuff with. So I love the idea of maybe the orcs within the theocratic nation borders, within canyons / valleys adjacent to the militant empire. So further away from the night side, But maybe the orcs are like a shared threat that both the theocratic nation and the militant nation kind of don't like. They kind of want to deal with them there. So I imagine that might be more of a red orc tribe. Basically because of how I plan on implementing orc tribes. Then the ant people themselves. So let's say more so on theocratic side than militant side. Then the ant people. I kind of like the idea of something having been within the militant nation's borders that they've kind of like dominated already into slavery. So I'm imagining some kind of wildkin clan within militant borders conquered and put into slavery. As for what race that'll be, so I'm thinking like bears, wolves, something interesting. I kind of like the idea of like some kind of lion people, even though it doesn't really fit the rest of the kind of worldview in this area. It could be interesting. Now, and people, maybe they are kind of within the sandworm tunnels beneath Desert Empire. I mean, I know at first I kind of said I didn't really want to put them there, but like the more I think about them, the more I just keep coming back to the idea of putting them there specifically. And I can't really think about putting them anywhere else. And then we'll have a Shira relationship with the Babylonians and Avia Sky Island above